NBC's Melanie Zanona reports from Capitol Hill. Also with me, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain and creator of the circus, Mark McKinnon. So, Melanie, I want to start on what we just heard there from the president, that this would be the biggest tax cut in history, and the alternative is a massive 68% tax increase. What's he talking about there?
Yeah, President Trump really trying to lay out the stakes for House Republicans here as GOP leadership races to pass this bill before the Memorial Day next weekend. And what Trump is referring to here is that at the center of this package is a permanent extension of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which is why he said if they do not act, if they let that law expire, there's going to be a tax increase. And the bill also includes a number of other tax priorities, things that Trump campaigned on, such as no tax on tips. He talked about that in the meeting as well. However, there are still a number of unresolved issues, including how much to cut Medicaid, how much to cap the state and local tax deduction. These are huge, sticky issues that are threatening to derail the entire process, which is why the GOP leadership decided to bring in the big guns, bring in the reinforcements today in the form of Donald Trump. And his message to Republicans, according to multiple sources in the room, was it's time to put the pens down, it's time to stop negotiating, and time to get this done. Just take a listen to what GOP leadership had to say about today's meeting.
He said now it's time for everybody to unify and come together and go past the bill, because we can debate issues for months and months on end, but at some point you've got to take a win, get the best deal you can, and then go pass this bill to get the economic balance that families need.
Failure is simply not an option. We have to get this done. What we're leaving to do right now is gather up the small subgroups in the House Republican Conference and tie up the remaining loose ends. I'm very confident that we'll be able to do that.
And if Republicans don't fall in line, Trump also warned that perhaps some of these members could face primary threats. So while this meeting was mostly described as a pep rally, I think Trump even said at one point that it was a meeting of love, there was a little arm twisting as well.
Okay, so Mark, here's what the president had to say right after the meeting.
I think it was a really great, that was a meeting of love. Let me tell you, that was love in that room. There was no shouting. I think it was a meeting of love.
Kumbaya, Mark. We have seen time and time again Trump move Republicans basically en masse by saying the time for talk is over. But with the concerns around this bill, not the least of which is what it would do to poor families, what it would do to people on Medicaid, what it would do to the deficit. Do you think these House Republicans will stick to their guns this time, tell the president no, or is he on a glide path?
Well, the problem is that the president didn't really push one way or the other. He just said, let's get it done. And I'm not sure that that's going to be enough because there's such a rift between the northeastern Republicans and the Freedom Caucus that I don't think just a big kumbaya is going to help much. The irony here is that this is really one big budget-busting bill, and Republicans have conventionally been the backbenchers throwing bricks around the House, but now they're in charge, and it's like the dog who caught the car. The problem for them ultimately, the bigger problem is that ultimately they'll pass something, and I think the problem's going to be is that the tariff thing was such a disaster, and Republicans kept saying, oh, this budget bill is going to fix everything. I think it's actually going to make it much worse. First of all, the tariffs haven't really kicked in, and I think they're going to imminently, and it's going to be a big problem. And then when the budget bill passes, assuming it does, it's going to make the deficit so much worse. And that's the irony, that Republicans who are supposed to care about the deficit over time, and multiple presidents have actually made the deficit much, much worse. And, people on Wall Street and economists are saying that there's really trouble ahead when this bill passes.
Well, President Trump twice today, Mark, stressed there would be no cuts to Medicaid, but just they were attacking waste, fraud, and abuse, and he suggested that there are multiple murderers getting Medicaid, which in this bill adds up to $1 trillion worth of cuts, not just to Medicaid, but to SNAP, supplemental nutrition to feed low-income families. Are there any political implications here for some Republicans that will make them even hesitate?
There's huge implications. The fact is they can't get the numbers to work unless they cut Medicaid. And Medicaid is, they're going to try and shift that to governors, and the Republican governors don't want to have to deal with it. So ultimately, yes, And yet, again, the bigger picture here is that there's this huge transfer of wealth going on. And the old Bernie Sanders message about, the economic transfer from low-income earners to millionaires and billionaires, people are going to understand that very clearly when and if this bill passes.
Melanie, well, let's talk about tonight or tomorrow morning. What exactly happens at 1 a.m.?
Other than members drinking a lot of Celsius and coffee tonight, this is going to be a key test for House Republicans. These next 24 hours are really going to be crucial because this is the necessary step in order to advance the bill to the floor. And there are two conservative hardliners who sit on that committee, and that's Chip Roy and Ralph Norman, both of whom voted present during the House Budget Committee meeting on Sunday. They have major issues with this bill, including how it treats Medicaid. However, I did catch up with Norman this morning after that Trump meeting, and he did sound a lot more warm to the bill and to this process. So we're getting some signs that it might pass the Rules Committee. I think the bigger test ultimately, of course, is going to be when it comes to the floor. As of right now, GOP leaders are planning to do that as soon as tomorrow, but there are still a number of holdouts. After this meeting, we are hearing that there are still some Republicans who are a no on this bill, and they want their issues resolved despite hearing from Donald Trump. And so that timeline could easily slip as the Speaker and the leadership really try to wrangle these remaining holdouts. Chris.
Congressman Boyle, this bill, as it comes down to the wire, I think, as we always knew, I think you and I, being a member of the Tax Writing Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, everything I was hearing about things they wanted to throw in this bill made it an impossible bill to begin with. It's the big impossible bill. That's what it should be called. And it is just a political disaster zone for these Republican House members, some in your state of Pennsylvania. The ones in New York alone, when they lose their seats, that alone gives the control of the House to the Democrats. Are the Republicans in the House tonight aware that this is the vote that could hand over control of the House to you and the Democrats?
Well, it's great to be with you, Lawrence. I will definitely be staying up tonight because I am testifying at that 1 a.m. hearing. A great sign, as you pointed out, that you're attempting to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people is when you schedule a hearing to begin at 1 o'clock in the morning. If they were proud of what they were doing, if they thought that this was something that would help them, obviously they would be doing this, during the day, perhaps in prime time. And not at 1 a.m. I do say that this reminds me very much of 2017. I believed at the time, and was proven correct, that we won the 2018 midterm elections during the summer of 2017 when Republicans passed in the House their bill to repeal and not replace Obamacare. And the fact that it went down in flames in the Senate didn't change the fact that they had come so close from getting rid of Obamacare. And sure enough, the following November, we won 40 seats to win back the House. I think, as you do, apparently as well, think the same thing is going to happen. The one thing I would point out, though, is this bill is actually significantly worse.
Oh, yes.
Because this piece of legislation will throw 13.5 million, almost 14 million Americans off their health care. First, you're cutting people off Medicaid. But second, this does include very deep cuts to Obamacare as well. And finally, I have breaking news for you tonight that literally just came out in the last few minutes as I've been sitting here. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the official authority on these figures, has now confirmed this bill, in addition to Medicaid cuts, in addition to Obamacare cuts, includes $500 billion worth of cuts to Medicare. That is now in this bill as well.
That is breaking news. $500 billion in cuts to Medicare. That's the biggest cut to Medicare ever contemplated by the Congress. There have been, over the years, trims to Medicare for budget reasons, but nothing on this order has ever been done to Medicare. What happened? Talk more about that breaking news piece that CBO has projected in here. Is that because of interactions that Medicare has with the Medicaid program?
Yeah, and forgive me, given your great experience on the Senate Finance Committee, you'll understand this, but it does get a bit wonky for normal folks. Basically, it is because of those interactions, and specifically because of a provision called PAYGO. That will force a certain amount of Medicare sequestration, again, to the tune, and these aren't my figures, these are the Congressional Budget Office official figures, $500 billion. So they take the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. They take massive cuts to Obamacare and then add on top of that the impact of all of their policies mean a result of the biggest cuts to Medicare in American history on top of all of that.
On Friday, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the Trump administration from using a centuries-old wartime law to rendition people in this country to a gulag in El Salvador. The court also ordered the administration to give people time to challenge their removal and exercise their due process rights. Now, the Trump White House is facing near constant rebukes from the courts at every level in an ongoing standoff over its immigration agenda. And the administration continues to escalate tensions by, for instance, arresting a sitting member of Congress, or charging a sitting member of Congress, I should say. This week, the Justice Department issued charges against Congresswoman LaMonica McIver over her oversight visit to an ICE facility in New Jersey earlier this month. Now, today, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, of course, that's the agency of the government that's overseeing all this, Kristi Noem, was before the Senate, where she had to answer for this administration's extreme and, in many cases, it seems to me, facially illegal deportation tactics. But she couldn't even answer a very basic question about one of the pillars of Anglo-Saxon law going back a millennia and our Constitution related to due process.
Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
I'm joined now by Jon Tester, who served as a Democratic senator of Montana for 18 years. He's now an MSNBC political analyst. I wanted to call you Senator. I guess I'm just going to call you John.
Perfect.
Okay.
That works.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You served 3 terms in the Senate, and you had a lot of opportunities to have members of an administration come before you in hearings. Republican, Democrat, cabinet level, sub-cabinet level. As someone who's covered this, it seems to me there is just a night and day difference between the quality of these folks and what they know in this administration and what had been the norm before that. Like Kristi Noem seems on her own category. Does that jive with your experience?
Absolutely, especially after watching the previous segment that you had with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Same thing with Kristi Noem. They got to do their homework. It's part of their job to know what's going on and what's going on in their agencies. And for Secretary Noem to say that she doesn't know what habeas corpus is and what due process is, and in fact goes further than that and actually gives the wrong definition for it, shows me that they're not taking Congress seriously and Congress's oversight, which they should take very seriously, by the way, because if Congress ever took their power back that they've given to the executive branch, that they would once again be able to hold these people to the standards that we've been used to during the 18 years I was there. And we had some really good people who headed Homeland Security, and we had some really good people who headed Health and Human Services. Unfortunately, right now, those and some others, by the way, really haven't done their homework, and I don't think they understand the jobs that they were confirmed to do.
This point you made, I want to stay on for a second. This sort of institutional prerogatives that, again, in the time that I've covered Congress, look, there's this sort of partisan axis. The members of the president's party are way more, amenable to that president, to that White House. The other party is way more antagonistic. But also, there's a kind of fiefdom effect, right? We come together and we appropriate these funds, or we put this into law because we expect you to do X, Y, and Z. That seems so far gone in this Congress in a way that I've never seen before. And I wonder if that feels the same to you, that there's something different here now.
Yeah, I think the Congress has ceded all their power to the executive branch. They have ceded it all. Now, look, they're doing oversight hearings, and that's good. But the truth of the matter is the president can do anything he wants right now. And Congress doesn't step up and say, whoa, 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 that's not in your authority. That's in our authority. That's our decision to make. Tariffs is a prime example. That's our decision to make. It's not yours. And consequently, we don't have three co-equal branches of government anymore. What we've got is we've got an executive branch. We've got a legislative branch that's AWOL. And I know those folks. They're good people. They know better than this. Dig up Robert C. Byrd. He would give you a lecture on why the legislative branch is so important if we're going to maintain a democracy. And then, of course, we have the courts. And the courts are trying to do their job, I believe, so far, if the executive branch listens to them and follows their orders.
That point on the tariffs, I mean, it really is astounding. The president on the big tariff announcement day announced the largest tax hike unilaterally in basically 60 years in dollar terms. He's continued to essentially, futz around. He pauses one, he jacks this one up, he brings this one down. You wrote this in the Montana, this is some of the stuff of how this is playing in Montana. You've got Montana farmers who see Canadian trade drying up, troubled by tariffs. The effects are hitting them left and right. And you've also said that, this mega bill is a disaster. But I wonder what you think about what Congress should be doing about these tariffs and what it means for the folks that you used to represent.
Congress should take their power back, and they should be the one applying the tariffs. I have more confidence in Congress doing the job right than I do President Trump, because quite frankly, he's botched this up pretty badly. And in an agricultural state like Montana and many others, you get in a trade war, guess who the biggest losers are? They're the farmers. And that's why this farm bill that came out of the House that's going to go into reconciliation is so bad. You don't want the market to be replaced by subsidies. That's not what farmers want. They want to go to the marketplace. They want to get a fair price for their product, and they don't want a bunch of handouts by the federal government. And that's exactly what's going on here. Instead of fixing the root problem, and the root problem is we need those markets and we need competition in that marketplace, what we're going to do is we're going to hand out hundreds of millions of dollars to farmers to try to make them whole because of the screw-ups that this administration's done.
Yeah, it's so crazy. You wrote about this for MSNBC, that the same House Republicans who decry socialism on one hand are pushing American farmers to take more money from the government, less from the marketplace, which sounds a lot like socialism to me. We had this in the first Trump administration when the sort of trade war skirmish with China, and they just sent a bunch of checks to farmers. It's just such a bizarre thing to replace actually growing product and selling it to not selling it and then getting checks from the government, which just doesn't seem like what anyone wants to be doing, including the farmers.
And it shouldn't be something that Congress wants to do either. It's not sustainable. And quite frankly, on this reconciliation bill, they're increasing the national debt with it. I mean, really? I mean, you're going to cut all these services and you're going to give checks to farmers, and you're going to increase the national debt, and you're going to give tax breaks to the uber rich in this country. Look, Congress has not been exactly stellar in the work they've done. The time I was there, you would oftentimes shake your head as to what they did and what they didn't do. But the bottom line is they could do a better job than what's being done right now by the executive branch. But that needs to be done in a bipartisan way, and you need to listen to everybody, and you need to come up with common ground, and then you move forward with bills that make sense. You don't just say, President Trump, it's yours. We're not going to do it anymore. We're not going to do what the forefathers intended and have three co-equal branches of government, which is what they need to do.
John Tester, who's got a long experience dealing with all this. I appreciate you coming on tonight. We'll see you again soon, I hope.
Joining me now to discuss the federal criminal charges against her filed by Trump's handpicked U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey, who I just talked about, is Congresswoman LaMonica MacIver. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. I know you have had a hell of a couple of weeks. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen, for having me, for allowing me to come on and talk about the facts of this case.
Of course. I was just watching, as I was preparing to talk to you today, back to some of the interviews on the day that all of this happened. And at the time, you described it, and so did your colleagues who are with you, as being assaulted by multiple ICE agents. Is that part of the argument that you want to make now and that you plan to make in court as you proceed here?
So I definitely plan on making that argument in court. I can't wait to have my day in court, where we can have due process, which this administration has stripped many of being able to have due process. But I'm looking forward to that, to telling the truth about what happened on that day.
When you look back at video, I'm sure you were just digesting it all in the moment when you were doing all those interviews that day. You've probably talked to your colleagues. As you've pieced together what happened, I mean, did you even know who you were surrounded by at the time?
It was fast. It happened so fast. I mean, I was just talking about this with Rep. Bonnie Watson the other day. We were on a segment together, and they were playing the video back, and we were just talking about how it was so disheartening to see that episode. It was a very tense situation. We were trying to ask questions, trying to get explanation from the officials that were there, and it was just so chaotic. And ICE and Homeland Security definitely escalated the situation, caused the chaos and the confrontation, and it just was so unnecessary. So it's really hard to play the videos back. It's very hard to watch, especially when we're just showing up to do our jobs, an oversight visit. That should have been simple.
It's also, I would just state, anybody can show up. You have this right as a member of Congress to an ICE facility to conduct oversight.
Without an appointment.
Without an appointment. Now, after the scrum outside that we just saw, that you have been charged with assault over, you did a tour of the ICE facility.
Yes. Yep.
Were any of the same people that you recognized from the scrum a part of that tour?
The same people were there.
The same people?
It was the same people. We actually had ICE officials come there. The ICE regional director for that area came along with many of his cabinet members. They were there, if that's what you call them. They came, they took the entire tour with us after that whole situation happened. I mean, and literally offered us a soda at that too. But whole tour, we were able to walk the facility. We even got stuck in the elevator in the process, which once again, that was one of the things that the mayor of Newark and the city claimed that they didn't have an inspection for, the elevator. We also were able to talk to detainees who told us that they were just very confused. They didn't know what was going on. It's been days since they had a phone call, since they talked to legal representation, which is a problem. Most of the folks we spoke to just were like, we wish we could have a phone call or someone would tell us what is going on right now. We just don't understand what is happening. And so, yeah, I've had a full tour.
It's with the same people. I'm just going to restate because I think that's a bit mind-blowing given where we are. I mentioned this in the opening of the show that the Justice Department has a public integrity section that always has to typically approve if there are charges that are going to be filed against a member of Congress or an elected official, and sometimes those are warranted. They did not do that in this case, according to NBC reporting, which I don't know if you just learned that today, but what is your reaction to that?
I mean, it's not shocking. We've been seeing from this administration constant, breaking of the rules, constant breaking of the process, constant disregard to the Constitution. We've seen it all, and so I try not to. I always say when I came into this job in September, believe it or not, it's only been since September. It feels like it's been 20 years. But once January 20th came, it was just like, hey, try not to be surprised by some of the things that they do because they're so, outrageous. And so to see them, disregarding process as usual, it's a regular day in the Trump administration of the things that they do.
You were charged by Alina Habba. I just gave a little bit of an overview, though. There, she has quite a history. Do you think you would have been charged if it had been any other U.S. attorney in this role?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I don't want to speculate. I mean, I think anyone that Trump, promotes or appoints. I mean, I think they've been problematic from every department you can think of. So I wouldn't say it wouldn't happen, but it's crazy because there's so many other crimes and things to be focused on, and definitely not to be focused on a congresswoman or Congress members who were there just to do an oversight visit. We were not there to bust detainees out of prison. We've heard that come out from the DOJ. We were there for an oversight visit. And Jen, this is something that we've done before. We were just a couple of weeks ago, back in February, we were at a same kind of detention center in Elizabeth, a couple of miles away, and we went there, different, providers, third-party provider, but we were there, had a visit. There was a little delay, but we still were able to go in and do our visit. We didn't have a whole, ICE unit come and create a chaos situation for us to take a visit. This is something that we're used to doing. We've done it before. And so we had no idea that it would spiral out of this. So I just think there are so many other important things for Alina to be focused on that she should be focused on rather than trying to stop, Congress members for doing their jobs.
No question about it. Lots happening in every state. You said this morning that, Habba said you had declined every opportunity to come to a resolution. You said they wanted you to admit to something you didn't do. What did they want you to admit to?
I mean, there was a lot. We've had a week of back and forth with them, and I will say that I did not waver. I showed up there to do my job, and she wanted me to admit to doing things, all of these different lists of things that she said that I did.
Like what?
I mean, from things of impeding, there was some other things in there that she put in there, but I can't remember exactly what it was. But she wanted me to admit to these things, sign an agreement to them, and I'm not doing that, because it's not true. And there was a lot of back and forth and just tenseness, all week from her and from her office. And so at the end of the day, once again, showed up to do my job, and I don't need to apologize for doing that. That is what the people of New Jersey expect for me to do. The 744,000, almost close to 800,000 people I represent, and why should we apologize about doing our job when ICE and Homeland Security created that environment and that atmosphere that we saw out there that day?
I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is there's so much disinformation out there. I want to play something that Tom Homan said earlier today on our air, which has a lot of disinformation on it, but I want to talk with you about it.
You say she has a right to do her oversight, but there's a right way to do it. Forcing yourself through officers to get in that facility is not the way to do it. We have many Congress visit our facilities. What she did was unprofessional.
He keeps using the word unprofessional, so I want to know what you think of that. But I also want to just ask you, there's a lot of inaccuracies in there. I want to give you a chance to tell everybody what all the inaccuracies are.
Absolutely. First of all, number one, we can show up to any facility, any ICE facility, unannounced. We like to come unannounced because we want to see the conditions in the state that they are, not with a planned visit where they have time to fix up anything or, coerce anything of a visit. So we can do that. We can show up. Secondly, pushed our way through? No. Before that whole situation occurred, we were inside of this facility waiting for over an hour for ICE administrators to get there to take us on this tour. We were also there with the GEO, which is the prison, the private prison company that runs this location, who we were talking with the person who was in charge of the facility, who was actually lovely, by the way. He was providing us with great information. He was like, hey, I would love to give you guys a tour, but we have to wait on ICE because they said that I can't. So at the end of the day, we're waiting over an hour for them, to come. We didn't bust our way through. We didn't do any of that. We were invited there, waiting there for them to come and give us a tour. And afterwards, we see them come, and they're rushing to focus on the mayor of Newark, which we're like, what is going on here? We're just here for our tour. Why are you going out here to deal with this situation? So at the end of the day, I mean, everything that he's saying, he doesn't have the facts. I mean, it's just so much disconnect, I think, between all of their departments and their leadership. They're not on the same page. And unprofessional, no. It's unprofessional for us to have to go through that. I think when three members of Congress show up to your gate, you should have some respect and have some professionalism with them. But this is this administration. There is no basic governing respect or, character with this administration. Things are just rogue. They're doing whatever they want to do. I mean, just not even a basic conversation. I think about coming from city council and how I used to work with colleagues, and we would disagree, but we would still show up professional, both of us, to be able to perform for the people that we represent. And it's just not there. The same, professionalism is not there. So I find it it's silly and honestly outrageous for, him to call me unprofessional when they created this unprofessional situation.
Congresswoman MacIver, thank you so much for joining me. I know we have daughters the same age. I'm sure she's very proud of you.
Thank you
for being here.
Who is the next generation of the Democratic Party? Semafor is reporting that at least a half dozen senators are now viewed as potential 2028 candidates by their colleagues and top Democrats on Capitol Hill. It's a lot of folks. Semafor is calling it a potential presidential primary dogpile in 2028. Joining us now, Phil Bump and Peter Baker, who are still with us. All right, so Phil, let's talk about the field and what the field might need to consider. You've got some polling on what costs the Democrats in 2024. Lay it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you framed it as being the next generation, I think is really important. One of the things that we saw in 2024 is we saw this decline in support for the Democratic candidate among younger voters in particular. Part of that, I think, is just that younger voters don't recognize the exception that Donald Trump is within our political system. But part of it is just that the Democrats have actually lost ground, particularly among young men, and particularly young men of color. We've also seen polling that suggests that there's been sort of some reversion, that some of that support for Trump has probably been fallen back over the course of the first couple months of his presidency. So we're sort of in uncertain territory. But the Democratic Party has for a long time now been more subject to the whims of young people because young people are more likely to vote for Democrats than they are for Republicans. And so the Democratic Party has to be very attentive to this. And so I think that a candidate who's able to effectively argue to young people that they are the vision, that they are the way forward for the country, I think that person's probably going to have more luck as a general election candidate. The question, of course, is, are those young people going to vote in the primary and therefore help get that person on the ticket in the first place?
So I think that's a really good point that you made at the top, which is that for younger voters, Donald Trump is not an anomaly. He's not a disruptor of the status quo. He is the status quo. Donald Trump-style politics is what they've always known. And understanding that and understanding and then reacting to the world that we live in today, not the world that we lived in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is important. And what you have in the Democratic Party right now, Peter, is a generation that harkens back to a very different political climate. And there have been arguments out there made and criticisms that Democratic leadership are playing by old rules that no longer apply. Peter, you're on mute.
Sorry. In some ways, they are obviously playing by old rules. And it hasn't been successful for them, you can argue, because they've now lost the presidency twice to Donald Trump, once with the popular vote. And, there's an argument to be said that they need to go out there and find ways of fighting in a way that don't seem quite so decorous. That's what you hear from a lot of people who are in the party, particularly younger leaders, saying that the older members of the party who think that politics was played the way it was in the 80s or 70s or 90s, the Biden generation, that's long past. At the same time, of course, there are Democrats who will tell you you need to make a contrast. They're simply becoming a leftist version of Trump doesn't stand on principle. You need to stand for something better than just we have an ideology that's just different than his. That if you are arguing that he is a threat to democracy, if you're arguing that he represents a corrosive and divisive kind of politics, then simply being corrosive and divisive from the other side, changes the argument. So the Democrats haven't figured that out yet, and they don't have an obvious leader right now. These are a number of accomplished people who are making their way up to the foreground, but it's hard to see which of them at this point is going to emerge from that group in the way that Barack Obama did in 2008 as representative of a new generation.
Yeah, let's bring in somebody from the party, former New York Congressman and former DOJ staffer, Mondaire Jones. Mondaire, it's good to have you. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
The new generation of the Democratic Party, the next generation of the Democratic Party, what do they need to keep in mind?
Well, what they need to keep in mind is that we've got a whole election coming up in 2026 that is of existential importance, especially if people want to do something to rein in the excesses and the illegalities and the corruption of this current presidential administration. So we have to keep our eyes on the prize when it comes to that. And then, of course, if we're fortunate enough in this country to still have free and fair elections, a 2028 presidential election will take place. I don't think that, the so-called Biden cover-up is going to be prominent in 2028. I think there are going to be a lot of things on the minds of voters, but it is important, of course, for people to be honest about what happened in 2024.
Well, let's leave Biden out of it for a second and just focus on messaging. There's a debate within the Democratic Party whether they should lean more progressive. And there's polling numbers out today suggesting that the face of the Democratic Party by far is AOC, obviously on the progressive bent, or if they should go back and hew toward more of a middle ground. I wonder where, you've run elections, you've won elections. Yeah. Where do you stand on where the future is, what the path is?
Well, I think, first of all, that the reason AOC is so popular compared to many other figures in the Democratic Party is not because people view her to be progressive, so to speak. It's because they see her standing up to Elon Musk and Donald Trump at a time when people, not just Democrats, but independents and some disaffected Republicans alike, are saying, who the hell is going to at least try to stop these people from doing what they've been doing when it comes to tanking the economy, taking away fundamental freedoms, and so on and so forth? And you see her when she's out there talking about a message that sounds in economic populism. She's not out here using the word progressive, frankly. And a lot of members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus haven't been using that word very recently either.
So it's an ugly word now?
Look, I think it's a word, sadly, that has been co-opted by some of the more extreme members. Many of them don't even identify as Democrats and the far left of American politics. But what everyone can get behind is the fact that we need an economy that works for everyone. That is a bold economic agenda. So if Bernie Sanders and AOC are out there talking about it the way, Chris Deluzio in Pennsylvania and other moderates are, then that's a good thing. And that's unifying for the party.
Tell us about the talented Mr. Vance.
He's talented. He's impressive. I went back and reread Hillbilly Elegy almost 10 years after it was first published. It's a really good book. He's a good writer. He wrote it as a 30-year-old sort of self-reflective, earnest, painfully honest young man who was telling us the story of his upbringing in southwestern Ohio from a family of what he called hillbillies, a family that was suffering from addiction, poverty, and a kind of collapse, a cultural collapse even. And he was incredibly honest about it. It struck me as a strange voice to hear now because it sounds nothing like the vice president who I've been reading, listening to, trying to get a complete sense of the public record over the past few months. It doesn't sound like the guy who talks about childless cat ladies or who points a finger in the face of the Ukrainian president or who makes up lies about Haitian immigrants eating native-born Americans' pets in Springfield, Ohio. So for me, there's a mystery as to who this man is and how both voices are possible in the same human being. And the answer, I think, says almost more about America today than it does about J.D. Vance. Every human being remains a mystery to everyone else, and I don't pretend to have figured him out. But what it does show is a kind of failure of the country at every step of Vance's rise, which has been remarkable, which has been just a kind of storybook rise at age 40 to the vice presidency. There's been an American failure at every turn, and we can go through each of them if we have time, but that's the main takeaway that I've got from having spent a lot of time reading him and listening to him.
Yeah, George, we're all used to politicians sort of tacking, going this way or that way. George H.W. Bush being pro-choice his entire life, being picked by Ronald Reagan and becoming pro-life. We've seen Donald Trump go from pro-choice to being pro-life. And we've seen other politicians, when it makes sense, they will tact one direction, they will tact another. With J.D. Vance, it seems we have two completely different people. We have the guy that we all knew that would come on Morning Joe, that would talk about Hillbilly Elegy. That was the darling, not only of Silicon Valley, but also of the East Coast elites that he now attacks. He, of course, went to great schools and colleges. But you also had, it seemed, a thoughtful, introspective J.D. Vance in texts and emails that surfaced later. Very thoughtful, introspective J.D. Vance. And then you had the J.D. Vance of 2016 suggesting that Donald Trump was Hitler and suggesting that Christians shouldn't vote for him. So there's that J.D. Vance. And then you have the one that emerged, especially emerged during the campaign. We all know that there are the two J.D. Vances. I'm curious, in your searching for the talented Mr. Vance, when did that transition take place? How did it take place? Was there a road to Damascus moment that at least he made up, if it didn't actually happen, where he went from saying all these things about Donald Trump to being his biggest advocate?
That's a good question. It took a few years, and I don't think there was any single epiphany. But you have to imagine there was something a little repellent to J.D. Vance to be sitting at dinner with super rich CEOs, explaining the pathologies of his hometown and having them nod and smile because their own contempt for the working class is being confirmed? At a certain point, that role must have revolted Vance. There's a crucial moment when Hillbilly Elegy is published. Trump wins in 2016. Suddenly, Vance is a national voice explaining the white working class to the educated class. And at that same moment, Vance's political ambitions, which until then had been on a rather moderate conservative course, he supported John Huntsman in 2012, who made Mitt Romney look extreme. Suddenly, that path is blocked. And that's a crisis if you're a young, ambitious J.D. Vance. It took about 4 years from 2016-17 to 2021 for him to reappear as a fire-breathing culture warrior of the right. And I wanted in this piece to give him a kind of good faith credit for a genuine change of view on policies. He had been against tariffs. He began to support them. He had not been obsessed with immigration. He began to be obsessed with immigration, et cetera. In other words, I don't want to say his move toward Trumpism was a completely opportunistic thing. I think there may have been experiences, things when he moved back to Ohio that he saw that his own people, his friends were big Trump supporters. Maybe he saw a reason for that. What I find remarkable is that he went from being that thoughtful, reflective, and respectful young man to being vituperative and hostile and demonizing large groups of his fellow Americans while asking them to elect him to represent them. That's the change that to me reflects something ugly in the country, that our culture, our media culture, our political culture had turned so rancid by that time that in order to win, in order to get to power, Vance had to sort of betray his own decency and become a kind of spokesman for a pretty ugly side of MAGA.
So, George, there was, and I want to emphasize the past tense of was, a moment in J.D. Vance's life that at least I saw, and clearly you saw, where he could have assumed sort of a Robert F. Kennedy role in our politics. Robert F. Kennedy could go to Gary, Indiana, when he was running for president in '68, and have white steelworkers following him and trying to touch him and adoring him and voting for him. He could stand up in Indianapolis the night that Martin Luther King died and give an epic speech. Perhaps the finest off-the-cuff speech any American politician ever gave. J.D. Vance had that in him once, I would think. But then he comes to the crossroads of integrity and ambition. And he takes a right-hand turn on ambition. You write in part in this piece. Let's see if I can find it here. I just put it up. Hold on. It's
Mike Barnicle with a phone. Okay, good thing we have a 4-hour show.
Here we go. All right.
That was fast.
He's got it.
Not too bad.
Vance is a politician with an unusual interest in ideas and a combative nature fed by an old wound. The combination makes him capable of going a long way down an ideological road without paying attention to the casualties around him. Who is he?
That reminds me a little bit of Richard Nixon. There is that sense of grievance from his youth that Nixon had, that intelligence, incredible intelligence in both of them, and that hardness and willingness to see other people suffer at his hands, you could say. I don't mean physically, but certainly politically. And just, I mean, Vance is getting into these fights on X with random Xers, tweeters, whatever you call them these days, who say something about a policy and he comes back at them with profanity. It's as if one notion I had was that he has sort of been able to liberate himself from having been civilized by the meritocracy. He went to Yale. He married this very talented, very intelligent Yaley, who kind of taught him how to be an Ivy Leaguer. that you had to figure out that there are different varieties of white wine. This is all in Hillbilly Elegy. And there must have been some kind of pressure, internal pressure to conform to that. And now he's been liberated from it because those are the enemy. The Ivy League is the enemy. He gave a speech in which he said the professors are the enemy, which is a quote from Richard Nixon. Wow. So I think there must be a kind of freedom in being able to go on X and get into fights, and any challenge to his honor, he's going to come right back at it. It's a little bit like the culture that he describes in Hillbilly Elegy as hillbilly culture. And there, to me, there's a kind of relief at being able to do that at the national level and get away with it and even be rewarded for it by becoming vice president and possibly the next president.
The new piece is online now for The Atlantic. Staff writer George Packer, thank you very much. And